Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I am the Campaign Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. Today's session is going to be all about storyboarding. It's a very exciting topic and can really help you streamline your development. This session will be recorded and we will email a copy of it out to everybody who has registered, so you can be watching for that in your email inbox. If you have questions during the webinar, please do use the questions panel. It looks like a couple of you have already found that, so please do send your questions in. We'll get to as many of those as we can. We're also going to be asking for your feedback and comments, so also use that questions panel there on the side part of your GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so let's just dive right into it. We have a fantastic guest today. We've got Josh Bleggi, our product operations specialist. Thanks for joining us, Josh. This is
no problem.
A popular topic. We did a similar webinar like this about a year and a half ago, and it's just been so useful. We have a lot of requests for that content. So here it is for you. Turn the time right over to you, Josh, and let's take it away.
Thanks, Andrew, and really appreciate everyone being here today. Like Andrew said, we've given this presentation once before, but I've updated it, so there's new information in here. But we'll just kind of get started here. I want to get to know you a little bit. So I just want to poll you. That's why, Andrew, if you could put that poll up. But I want to ask, which best describes your relationship with storyboarding? If you think about it as a relationship status, are you still looking? Are you just getting to know one another? Are you in a long-term committed relationship? Or is it kind of complicated? Or is there some other way you would define, what your relationship is at this point? So we'll give you a couple seconds to
that poll is up on the screen. You can just click directly on the screen to make your vote. Let us know if you're still looking, just getting to know one another, long-term committed relationship, etc. And if you do have a different relationship that we weren't able to pin down in some relationship style text, please let us know in the questions panel, so that we know what other options we have out here. However, it does look like the majority of people are able to pick from those four.
Oh, nice.
And I'll go ahead and close it out and share those results. So 34% of our audience are just getting to know one another. Storyboarding may be a new part of their process. 29% are in a long-term committed relationship. 23% say it's complicated. And 14% are still looking. So we have quite the spread here.
Okay, great. So yeah, so it looks like got a good cross section of everybody in like different phases of how they're using storyboarding or what they're using it for. So as we're talking today, you might be thinking, there's a lot of challenges that you have that are either with storyboarding or with just course creation in general, and some of those might include things like you don't have enough time, you don't have a budget for what you need to do. You're not sure how to do whatever it is you're being asked to teach, and how are you going to get everything through review on time? That's a big challenge. Or how are we going to keep all these courses consistent? You've been asked to create a learning path or whatever curriculum of a bunch of content that you want to make sure it all at least looks the same, it feels the same, even though it's going to be different material. How do you do that? And those are all big challenges that I think many of you face. I know we've faced them here at eLearning Brothers. And so this might seem like negative things, might seem like hard things to overcome, but really what they do is they give you the chance to be creative, because creativity really loves constraints. So whether that's time, budget, process, those things, they all just aid in you becoming more creative. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how can you use a systematic approach to your storyboarding to overcome some of these challenges that you're facing, if not all of them. But how we're going to do that is we're going to discuss the benefits of creating what I call a storyboard design system. Then I'm going to show you a case study from here at eLearning Brothers as we developed our courseware. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how do you create your own SB design system. So the term design system, it's actually something that we're going to borrow from the software development world, where within mainly UX design and application development, a design system is a collection of reusable components that are guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. So it's pretty much within your organization, think of it as a more intense style guide for how you would develop something. So when we're talking about like here at any sort of software development, you're trying to keep everything consistent so that you don't have maybe different button shapes in different parts of the application or different windows looking different depending on what you're building. And in e-learning design, you're struggling with the same kind of concepts, right? Where you want to keep all your courses consistent, you want to keep all your branding consistent, things like that. And so if we look at these design systems, then here's a good example of one. This is from Atomic Design. It's really just a collection of components that keeps things uniform and in the same kind of vein as each other. And we can do that with storyboards too. But I would like to change the definition a little bit when we get to there. But really what the benefits of these design systems are is they enable you to have creative freedom to create what you need to create, but giving you the constraints to create it in a very cohesive way. It saves you time because you're not thinking through every little design decision as you're going. You're only thinking about the big picture type stuff. It reduces friction, just makes things a lot easier to create, and it encourages collaboration because now you're all working from a common set of understanding of different things that you can include and can't include. You have that system built to where everything will remain consistent, no matter how many hands touch it. And so for us, what a storyboard design system does, or is, as a definition, is going to be it's a living collection of templates guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to design any number of courses in a streamlined, uniform, and accessible manner. Now, the reason why I say living collection is because you'll always add to this. This isn't just a one and done type deal. As you come across new use cases, new challenges, you'll add new things to this. So you're not stuck with just your first set and that's it. You keep adding to it, so that way you can continue to build out different courses, but everything remains consistent as you do so. Again, the benefits to this, identical. So when we're creating this allows us to have creative freedom. It saves us time, reduces friction, and encourages collaboration across the board. Because again, it's building that common understanding between your team of how things are supposed to look, feel, and flow together. And some of the advantages to having this system, it really does give you the freedom to break rules because it gives you some constraints on what you're able to do. It might sound kind of two counterpoints, but really, since you're not worrying about, again, all the little things that you need to do, like are interactions looking consistent, or images consistent, things like that, it gives you a chance to really focus on the content and make sure that all the big picture, all your teaching, you're able to get everything across. And then it allows you to say, okay, well, I don't have what I need to create this point. Well, I have this system of stuff, so I'll go in and borrow from this and this and this and make sure that I can then build what I need to do, what I need to accomplish. It also makes it easy to test and change direction because you're building something pretty simple at the beginning that then will lead into a more complicated structure later, because storyboarding is really meant to just test ideas, to show and get approval, those kind of things. And so this will allow you to be able to just make some simple changes, change direction if you need to because of that. It also sets up this cadence of design, develop, reuse, and repeat, because you're then creating, again, a system of things you can put together to be able to then just use multiple times. That's the whole guiding principle, is that everything is reusable. And then always accessible, meaning that, when we're talking about Section 508, WCAG compliance, you're able to set that up from the get-go, and then all the interactions that you have set up for that, since they're already set up, you don't have to worry about those compliance checks later on. So Andrew, is there any questions right now before I go into the next portion?
No, I'm not seeing any questions about what you're talking about. There's a couple questions that we'll probably want to take at the end, just to see if you answer these questions throughout. But yeah, no pressing questions.
Okay, great. So I'm going to show you how we accomplish this here at eLearning Brothers. Now, again, I want to go kind of talk about the purpose of storyboards a little bit. Really, it's to get everyone on your team to come to a common understanding of what you're building, what you're teaching, those type of things. And so your teams may be made up of different people. And so like in our case, we're kind of lucky where we have different people with different expertise that we're able to draw from and have everybody kind of focus on what's important and what their own talents and abilities allow them to do. But some of you may be in a circumstance where you're the single person making all these decisions, doing all these different aspects of the production. And so really just trying to get yourself so that you understand what you need to build. But in our case, we have instructional designers, we have visual designers, we have developers that are going to be developing the courses, and then we also have SMEs and reviewers that we need to be able to bring to this common understanding. And in our case, it's pretty unique. Well, at the time, it's pretty unique. I think now it's more commonplace, where we're kind of distributed across the country. We have some people here located at our headquarters here in Utah. We had others that are back east, some that are in Mexico, Philippines, like across the world. Where we need to be able to bring everybody together and have them come to that common understanding. And so for us, the tool that we chose to use to create our storyboards when we were creating our courseware was Google Slides. And I know in the past I've gotten some questions about why we chose that tool. And the reality is these principles that we're talking about today can apply to any tool. They're pretty much tool agnostic, but we chose G Slides just because of the fact that we could easily collaborate with each other from distance on the same document. We can also share it with ease. So there's a lot of reasons why we chose to go that route, and it works for us. It might not work for your organization. You guys may want to use PowerPoint. You may want to use Lectora or Storyline or something like that to do your storyboarding in. And we'll talk about kind of the advantages and disadvantages of all that later on. But you really just got to pick what works best for you. So that's why we chose to go with G Slides as our main mode of storyboarding. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of exit out of my presentation here real quick and show you our storyboard design system that we created to be able to develop all our courseware. So this is for our most recent iteration of courseware, which are all micro-learning modules.
Sorry to interrupt you, Josh. What were the names? What was the name of the product you just mentioned?
What? The product that we storyboard in, or what we created, or what?
Right. The one. So you storyboard primarily in
Google Slides. Yes.
Right, but it's very easy to do this in other.
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
So that's something that we want to reiterate here again. We're going to be showing you in Google Slides, but it's very, very easy to do this in PowerPoint or other tools.
Right, correct. Yeah, so really what we're showing is what works for us. You'll just have to determine for your team what works best for you. And so that could be, again, that could be a different tool than what we're showing here. So for us, the way that we set up our design system, so you can get some ideas of how to create your own here, is we started with a baseline file that included our full course structure. Let me make this a little bigger because it's, well, that's maybe too big for our courses. So all these courses, they're micro-learning, so they're meant to be about 7 minutes in length as far as seat time goes. We were also building them so that they were kind of a long scrolling web page style course or story style course in domino flow, and so that we need to design for mobile first is the idea, is to make these very mobile accessible. And so we decided to go with these long scrolling pages like you'd see on a typical website. And so in order to create each of these courses, keep them consistent, we set up a baseline file that included our basic course structure, our framework, as it were, to allow us to create everything in a very similar fashion. So you can see here we have, kind of an intro, a course goals, and then some additional sections here. And as you go through this file, you'll notice that we have different layouts that we can draw from that our designers went through and created for us. And there's different styles, different colors, different, for sections. You can think of these as individual slides too, if you're thinking, Storyline, Lectora, those type of programs. But it just gave us a bunch of different elements to play with. And if we ever came across a situation where we needed to deviate from what we have already created, we would simply just go back to the drawing board and add something new. And it was pretty fast to do that because G-Slides, PowerPoint, they kind of all function the same way. It's pretty easy to just go in there and add shapes and style text and everything. And we also made sure that however we set it up in the storyboard also worked in our tools. So like with Thumbnail Flow, we ran into some issues where situations where we needed to do two different styles of text. So we needed like you see here, we needed some sort of bold with some sort of body text style. Well, we couldn't do that in the same text box. And so we set these up so that they were individual text boxes here as well. So when our developers got it, they understood that they were supposed to build this as two separate text boxes, not just one, that they would style a certain way. So you kind of have to bring those considerations in too. So we did that and just set this up as our basic structure to our course. And this is a good way to start your courses, because if you have a baseline file that you're working from, it just allows you to add to it with ease. And so that's one thing that I would encourage folks to do is when you're setting these up, have one thing that you start with and then you add to it with all these other elements that you're going to be creating. Along with this baseline file too. So like this also will include our quiz template and some other activities and things with it that are all remain consistent. The other thing that we added to it was a set of interactions. And so these are interactions, again, that we knew worked for 508. We knew they were able to be built in tool and work out just fine for both mobile and desktop. And so we had our designers just, again, create us mock-ups of what these would look like. So like here you see a tabbed interaction. Well, in our storyboard, we didn't want to take up all the space to show all 3 or 4 tabs that we had. And so let me zoom in here real quick. Well, so for us, we just put all the different tab content just on one page, just make sure it's delineated. We tend to use a pink color to say, basically, hey, look at me, pay attention. It's a signifier our team has just come to know. And so we use that for things that aren't necessarily content, but they are notes basically for us to look and see. And so that's just some of the interactions. A lot of these were tab, click to reveal type interactions. Since we were dealing with mobile, we had a lot of accordions that we were building out. There's a timeline here, carousel. So all different types of interactions that we could just pull from. And again, if we needed something different, or the learning was telling us we needed to do something different, we made sure to bring our heads back together and say, okay, what do we need? What can we build? What do we need to build here? And we created and just kept adding to this. And so if you notice, this is a pretty long document, not just because of the page, but just because of the breadth of things we were adding to this document as we were going along. And so like for us, the real challenge was, the reason we went this direction and created this system was, again, to keep consistency across our entire team, but also it was really a speed thing for us as well. Because if you look at our courseware library, we have about, I think if you group both safety and cybersecurity together, we have around 140, 150 courses that we were building, these little micro-learning modules. And we did that all in roughly, I believe, 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that ballpark. It was really a fast turnaround and a lot of content to develop. And so by developing the system, we were able to be, again, keep things consistent and be faster in our storyboarding process and in our development process, really, because we had a very consistent method of being able to communicate with one another and to show what we needed to build. And so talking with Chris Willis, who was our lead on courseware and is our director of product content here at eLearning Brothers, she made this statement. She said, storyboarding this way looks like a lot of extra work, but the system actually reduces work over time, and the more you use it, the greater the ROI. So there's a lot of setup for these storyboard systems in the beginning, and as you develop, there is some time, again, when you come across a new situation where you're going to be adding to this. But the more you use this and the more courses you build with it, you'll see the value to it pretty quickly because it, again, it keeps everything consistent, usable, and this continues to be a time saver as you go on. So, Andrew, is there any questions before we go in to talk about how they can do this themselves?
There's a lot of requests for a storyboarding template. I don't remember if you and I had talked beforehand if we were going to make something available. One thing's for sure, we're not going to send the storyboarding template that we use for our off-the-shelf courses, but we can try to make something available and get that out, I believe. I think we have something that we've sent before.
We've had something in the past. We've been meaning to update it, and so we'll look into. We'll get something together and send that out.
It may or may not be ready by the time we send out the recording today.
Right.
But check back with us, and we'll try to get something produced and published for you.
Right. Yeah, we've had a lot of asks for that, so we've been working on something, and so we'll get that out as best we can. If we don't get it out today with the recording, Andrew, we'll keep this list of attendees and send it out when we do.
Sure, sounds good. One other question that we can take right now, what's your view on storyboarding inside the tool?
We will talk about that here in a minute.
Fantastic.
That's actually a good segue into this. So we'll just kind of start.
Sure.
You'll have to create this yourself because, again, like I said, it really just depended on what your team needs is as far as how you're going to do this. And so there's a variety of ways of doing this. Again, this is meant to be somewhat tool agnostic to where you can do it really however best fits your needs. But some things to keep in mind is that a good storyboarding design system will be repeatable, meaning that you can provide consistency across multiple courses. It will be scalable, meaning that it can, you can add or take away from it if you need to, and it will need to be usable. So that means that all the elements that you're adding to it will reduce complexity over time. You'll be able to just continually add things to it as you go along. A few other things to consider. Again, we're bringing back constraints. So like we were talking about earlier, some of your constraints might include things such as, what are my tool considerations? So like for us, like we said, Domino Flow, we had some constraints with text boxes and how those worked. Okay, so we need to address those in our storyboarding process. So that way when we got to development, it was easy to understand what we were asking to be built. The next constraint might be your project objectives. What are you trying to teach? What are you trying to make people understand as they're taking your course? Another constraint might be, how are people going to experience this learning? Are they taking it on their phone? Are they taking it on a computer? Is it an ILT? Things of that nature. And then branding requirements. We all face those, right? Where the things need to look like they belong to your company or the company that you're building the course for, right? Some other strategies to consider as well are, what things can be repeated and repurposed. Sometimes you actually can't build a template for something. It's either too simplistic, like it's just, page layout, or sometimes it's just never going to come up again because it's very particular to that learning. You also need to think about what your team structure is, because that will depend on what you build and how you build it, right? Because you could be the designer and the developer all in one. You could be, have different roles across your team. You want to keep that in mind as you're looking at how you would create this. And then really the important thing is, what's your process, and then how can you create common understanding? To me, so I'm a very process-oriented person. That's actually my whole job basically here at eLearning Brothers, is to make sure we're following a consistent process. And so you really want to be able to have that process nailed down of, okay, who gets it, who gets the storyboard when, what needs to be done before they get it, and then what's my review process look like. You need to have all those things kind of figured out so that you can understand, again, how you want to build this for your own team.
There's a question on this. How do the roles of the team or the team structure affect how you would use the storyboard design system? So, for example, we have a pretty defined process.
Right.
How do you scale that?
So pretty much it came down to who was involved when. So like in order to be able to allow our designers or instructional designers to design the storyboard, we needed to have these interactions like you saw mocked up there from our design team, from our graphic designers. And so they would have to come in there first and make sure those were created, and then the instructional designer gets in there and starts tinkering away. Well, they would then come up to a roadblock, and then you'd have to bring in a graphic designer to come in and help you build what you need to do to get the objective met, right? And so at that point, then there's collaboration, which again brings into why we use G slides, is because we wanted to have that collaboration aspect. So that way, Stacy here in Utah could talk to Chris in Michigan and get everything sorted out. And that was a very common process for us on, depending on the course we were working on. We needed to create something, especially earlier on when we were just starting to build this thing. We need to be able to collaborate like that. And then just sending it out for reviews to SMEs and things, you want to be able to have whatever tool or whatever you're making available and easily accessible to a lot of people. And again, that's why we use G slides. Again, easy to send out a link, things of that nature. But you can do that in other tools in other ways to be able to have that review process. But that really determined how we built this to make sure that people were involved at the right point in time. And again, we had to structure our storyboards in such a way our developers could understand it, since they weren't the ones designing anything. We need to make sure that we could easily communicate what needed to be built to them. And so that's, again, the text box is a good example of that, why we separated those out, so that way they know which ones need to be in which styles, and they didn't try to push it all into one text block. And so again, it's just building it so that way everyone has a common understanding and can get their job done as they're using it. Because again, going back to usable, if it creates friction, then you did it wrong. Like if it increases the amount of time it takes for you to do something, it's not a good system. It's not usable at that point.
All right, great, thank you.
So I'm going to talk about 4 different types of storyboard setups. And so all these kind of increase in complexity as you go along. Really, the first 2 are very similar, and 2 and 3 are similar in complexity, but they do tend to get a little more complex as you go along. So the first one's going to be overlays. Then we're going to talk about wireframing, or what I commonly refer to sometimes as gray boxing, and then mockups, and then prototyping. And so just to kind of show you examples of all these. So an overlay is essentially what it sounds like. You take a template like you would get from eLearning Brothers in our course starters, and you just put boxes over the different content areas to show. So basically this is a screenshot where you just put these boxes over the different content areas that you need to address. And you just type in your text, put in your notes to your developers off to the side, put in your put in your narration, script that you might have someplace else, and add any images that you would want to include, and then pass this off. Some advantages to this is that it is pretty quick to set up. Some disadvantages to it is it's a little bit, it's kind of the fast and dirty approach. It's very quick to create it, but it's also the least, I guess, the least easy to understand as far as I see it, because it's less, it's definitely less about the visuals and more about just getting the content in there. In some ways, I kind of think too that this overlay method tends to be a bit more, takes a little bit more time. Like your time's not as well spent, so the amount of capital that you're putting into it from a time perspective generally isn't as great, I think, as if you were using one of these other methods, such as wireframing, which essentially is, again, you have that, what interactions you want to use, and you just set up these gray, what I call gray boxes, because traditionally in UX design they will be like, you're really allowed to use black, white, and shades of gray to differentiate different elements. But this just allows you to take out pretty much all color images, everything, and just put in text where you need to put it. It just really gives a very good understanding of where things need to go, very clean understanding where things need to go, And then ideally how you would set this up is you'd have this template in, say, like a G-Slides or a PowerPoint, something like that. And then you would just create templates that correspond to each one of these layouts in whatever authoring tool you're using. So that way when your developers get it, they know they see this wireframe. Okay, well, that corresponds to this template. And so that's kind of the important thing, is you want to be able to show the marriage between those two elements to say, okay, my storyboard looks like this. It corresponds over here to this in tool. And an even easier way to make that happen is to maybe add a little bit of color into a mockup so it looks a little bit more finished, and your developers, designers can see what it's supposed to look like when it's all said and done. Because here you see we have a selected state and a hover state. That white there is a hover state to show the different states that buttons might need to be in. Gives a little bit more understanding, and these are probably actually better earlier on if you haven't already developed your template set in your tool. This way your developers know what your expectation of your, the style on your templates will look like. But these are also very similar to wireframes. Again, you just put in the content that you would add in there. It just allows it to look a little bit more finished. So maybe if you're showing this to a reviewer in a storyboard fashion, this would be the one that you would go with, to just show them very simply, this is roughly what it would look like. And make sure that they're okay with the style before you continue to build out everything. And so these wireframe mockup, those are, I think, the two methods that I say I prefer myself, just because they're pretty fast to test, they're pretty easy to create, and you can also go back and just make adjustments on the fly if you need to before you get into your authoring tool. And so the last one, and this question's already come up, is why not do this in tool? And so that's what I would refer to as a prototype when you go in storyboard in tool, because you're adding a little bit more functionality to it than you would on any of these others. And so, yeah, the question is, why wouldn't you do this in tool? Well, there's some advantages for sure to doing it in tool. Number one, it's closer to being a finished product at that point. It kind of shows what the final state would look like better than all these others do. And it also just cuts out a step, right? It says, okay, well, I'm writing tool, so I don't need to worry about doing, an additional storyboard step to it. So that advantage is also a disadvantage. And here's why. So there's this, and in UX design, there is a kind of an inverse relationship where the more things look like it's finished, the less feedback you'll get. So if you want to get feedback from your reviewers and things, maybe some learners and things to test it, the more they see something that's finished, the less likely they are to give you feedback, because they think that it's already done. It's just this mental thing that clicks to says, okay, well, this is done. You're not going to make changes to it. So why would I tell you to change something, right? And so you'll get better feedback from these other methods because they look less finished. Again, you lose out on kind of it being closer to done, and you still have to go back and build it. But again, that's why you build a corresponding template set in your tool to correspond with your storyboard, so that solves that time issue. The other disadvantage I see to building an in tool is it takes focus away from the content and makes you worry about 100 different things, because you get into say Lectora or Storyline or whatever tool you're using. There's a lot of different commands there, and if you have some proficiency in that tool, you know where things are at, and so you're going through and tweaking things and worrying about things that you don't need to do at a storyboard standpoint, because it's really just storyboards are just there to communicate to get to a common understanding. And you're now worried about, okay, well, that button's not functioning right, or that's not the right color, or the text isn't right. And that's not really what storyboarding is about. That's your development process, is where you can bring that into play. And so in storyboarding, you don't want to be worried about all those things. You want to be focused on what's the content, and then maybe somewhat on the styling, so that way you can show your client what it would look like. But at that point, it's still, if you're doing it in like a PDF or something for them, they still know that it's unfinished, and they'll still give you feedback because you haven't built it in tool yet. And so those are kind of the advantages and disadvantages to doing it in tool. And I'm actually going to show you a way that we are releasing for Lectora, which is made by eLearning Brothers. of how you can storyboard within Tool by keeping still keeping things kind of low fidelity, so that way you can be able to, again, show that common understanding and maybe show some sort of a stopgap measure between these two things. So I'm just going to show that to you real quick here in Lectora Desktop. So we are releasing a couple different template sets. One we're calling frameworks, the other we're calling wireframes. And these are mainly to help you get set up and get your development process up and running quicker. And so these would be what I would consider when you have your storyboard created, this is how you would go in and actually create your first set of templates for your building in Tool from that storyboard you have now created. These are an unstyled set of course frameworks that have just basically all your basic elements you would put in here, your objectives, your pages, your content pages, things of that nature, already pre-built in here for you to kind of start with. And these are different structures. The one I'm showing here is our basic linear, as straightforward a course as you can possibly get, but we do have others that are built to do branching, trying to think of some of the other ones. So we have branching when we get some that are testing and test out type ones. So that way you can set those up in advance. You go in and style these as you would want to, and start building from these once you have your storyboard created, or you could again use these as your storyboard if you chose to go that route. We've also included some wireframe interactions, which are again unstyled interactions to allow you to come in and just plop that in. Maybe if you are using this as a storyboard, it shows what you can put in the content and then show it this way before you add in a lot of images. The other way, again, that you can use these is you can style them according to your brand standards and save them as a template, as a library object, and bring them in. I mean, that's really how these are all built, is as a library object that you just kind of drag and drop in here. So it allows you to create a system to allow you to either storyboard or get faster at your development and develop these templates that you need once you have your storyboard created. And so again, these are releasing for both Lectora Desktop and Lectora Online here within the next few weeks. And so we're kind of in the process of just getting them up on our library, and we'll let you know when these are released. But these are a good thing to help you get from, again, they could be used as a storyboard themselves, or they could just be the way that you get from your storyboard design system and get that into Tool quicker. And so that's really what I had to show you as far as how to create these. At the end of the day, again, it comes back to do what works for you. If you don't like the idea of using G slides, that's fine. That doesn't hurt my feelings one bit. If you like doing it in Tool, again, that's perfectly all right. You just got to do what works for you and what will help you, again, get to that common understanding with your team and with your other stakeholders that you have. And that's really what it's meant to do, is to allow you to do that and then keep consistency across the board and bring down your development time as well, design and development time as you're building courses. So with that being said, just some last takeaways here. Remember, we're trying to create a common understanding. We want to use whatever tool is right for our job here. These different components that we're building in become key, because the more things we add to this system, the more useful the system will be. And again, just whenever you're developing a course, be sure that whatever you're developing, whatever templates you might be developing, whatever you want to add to your design system, that you're keeping your learning objectives at the forefront, because we really didn't add anything new to our system until we knew that the objectives called for it, until we knew that the learning needed it. And so that's what I would just keep in mind as you're storyboarding and as you're building out this system. So Andrew, are there any questions from the audience?
Oh boy, are there. Okay,
Oh,
so a couple questions here. So you've given us a lot of very useful tips on making effective storyboards. Do you have any tips for making the whole process of storyboarding go faster? And I know a lot of these things have give and take for example, if you're not building your storyboard in the tool, you can view that as needing to build it twice, but at the same time, it accelerates the building of the storyboard, even though you're gonna have to build the course and things like that. So what would you do to just speed up the process overall of storyboarding if we're finding that it's taking a very long time?
If we're finding it's taking a long time to storyboard, you need to kind of focus more on your system and get all your elements built in place. I know that seems like that's a lot of work, but if you set things up front to, again, set yourself up for success, it allows you to build quicker. The other thing I would say, if you're trying, because I think what they're trying to get at is not just the storyboarding process, but the entire development process, getting it faster from storyboarding to in tool. I think it comes into having both a good storyboard design system where you have your elements created and ready to be put into your storyboard that you can just drag and drop in there and type in your content and you're good to go. I think also another key to good storyboarding is understanding your objectives, what you're trying to teach. That always makes things go faster, because I know when we were doing this, when we were having struggles with the objectives, we had struggles doing the whole process. And so understanding those objectives clear is always a good thing. So that might mean consulting your SME a bit more, doing some research online. For us, that meant a lot of times we were digging into OSHA standards for hours, looking for what needed to be taught. And those are not the most entertaining documents to read, by the way, if you haven't gotten into that. But that understanding of those objectives is key. But then also having a corresponding template set. That's something that I've touched on here, but I probably could have brought in a little bit earlier on, is to say no matter what you create as far as a storyboard template, make sure whatever tool you're using, you have a corresponding template you can pull from. Because for us, that's what we did, is we created the storyboard. The developers then went and created a corresponding template that we could drag and drop into the tool as needed. And again, that's why we built frameworks and wireframes, is to help you get the step further, because we took out the logic and now all you have to do is we kept in the logic, we built that for you, and now all you have to do is go in and style them.
Chris Willis is also voicing, it helps that they're all pre-tested for 508 and functionality in advance. All the tool templates are matched, so that can help to accelerate it.
Absolutely.
How do you ensure that when developing, you're not deviating too much from the storyboard?
We have a review process that we put in place. So we have, like I mentioned earlier, we have instructional designers, we have graphic designers, and we have developers all on our team. And so you want to make sure you're not deviating too far from the storyboard by having someone else go back and review it. And so in our case, that was, we would have our graphic designers go be our first QA, and they would go in, and their whole thing, they were not testing for functionality or any bugs or anything of that nature at that point. They were looking at, okay, is everything matching up as we have it here? You know, as the instructional designer and graphic designer designed it, is everything matching up? If there was any errors, they would go back and make those changes. If you're doing this as a team of one, that becomes a little bit harder, but you just got to really go back there and look at how you have the storyboard built. Make sure, like, again, in your storyboard, you probably want to make sure all your text sizes and image sizes and things are roughly what you want to have it in tool. Sometimes there's some translation issues as far as, you know, a few pixels here and there, right? But you want to make sure you're as close to that and just go back and check each one of those elements just very briefly, go back and check and make sure that you're matching it very quickly. I mean, it really just comes down to looking at it visually. Does this thing look like this thing, right? Is it close? Is it matching? And that's really all that it takes.
Excellent. Now, you had mentioned some really cool new templates that are going to be releasing in the next week or so. That's for Lectora Desktop and Lectora Online?
Correct, yes. So those will be in Lectora Desktop 19 and as well as Lectora Online. We have both versions that we'll be putting up and making available in the library. So if you're already a subscriber, you'll get access to those. If you're not a subscriber, you should be. And you can talk to one of our AEs here at eLearning Brothers and get access to that.
Yep. Where does Audioscript come into play in the storyboarding process?
As far as timing, as far as when do you create that, that's really just dependent on, again, your process. Once you have all the content created on screen, you probably want to go in and script what you're going to have the narration say. As far as location on screen, traditionally what we'll do is we'll put it below the page in either a new text box there on the, I guess you call it the stage of whatever tool we're using, or we'll put it in the speaker notes if we're using something that has that functionality, and put it in there so that way we know to if you're using a text-to-speech generator, or text-to-speech generator, you can go and copy and paste, or if you're doing a traditional narrator, someone's coming in and doing the narration for you, you can put that into a script form pretty easily that way.
Now, what you've talked about here has been when we were developing our off-the-shelf courses, which are content bundles that you can purchase and they're ready to go. They're fully built courses that you can upload directly to your LMS. Or if you don't have an LMS, you can buy those courses and they'll be automatically included in the eLearning Brothers LMS and you can distribute them that way. However, so because those are what you've been storyboarding primarily for, your stakeholder, your client is eLearning Brothers and the people that are working on it, and Chris Willis and those who are working on that. So you might not be able to answer this question of how do you deal with the process of storyboarding and review when you're trying to get approval from a client. And I know you've also worked with our custom development a little bit, Katie and Jonica, and talking about this. So maybe you have some thoughts on that.
As far as like dealing with an external client, you really just want to make it easy for them to review it. And so for like our case where we were doing it in G Slides, if I did have to send that to an external client, I would just send them a restricted link to where they only had access to that, and they could go in and put in comments. Make sure it was like a view only thing where they could go in and put in their comments. If you're working with them and say like, I know that if you're doing your storyboards in tool, like Tora, we do have Review Link, which allows you to go in and do review. That's actually how we do our internal reviews now. When we're building things in like Tora, we'll just go in and do that, and it's really nice because you can go in and draw and type in comments and things directly on, kind of where things would go on the screen. And I know other tools have similar functionality. I know Storyline has Review 360 and things in there as well. So you would send that to them. As far as like how much detail, like which method you would use to communicate with them, it really depends on what their expectations are. So if you're just sending it to them to approve content, it's really easy just to send them, a wireframe or a mocked up course to say, well, here's our content, here's our plan, and you can kind of walk them through it, and then have them review it from that point. But if they're building it in tool, there's, like I said, there's other ways to review it, depending on which tool you're using.
Fantastic. And then when you're starting, do you start with the content or with a script? This also kind of comes back to if you need a voiceover in your content.
Yeah, I mean, you really could start either way. For us, we started with the content, what we needed to teach. If you already have the script that is your content, so you're really kind of saying two similar things. I know traditionally with an Audioscript, your kind of best practice is to put like the highlights on the screen, and that way it's not just, while someone's reading me this screen that I could read for myself, kind of thing. And so you would then use that script to pull out what content needs to go on, whichever screen you're working on. So really it's either. I guess it's the answer there.
Fantastic. How do you keep those who are reviewing the content, how do you keep them focused on content and not the functionality of the elements?
Again, you strip out as much complexity as you can. So like if you're trying to keep them focused on content, that's where the wireframe comes in, because then it's all only content that you're doing. Same thing with kind of mockups. Mockups, you get a little bit more into, well, I don't like that shade of orange, kind of thing. But you just strip out them as much complexity. That's why that in-tool stuff, it might seem quicker, but really if you're trying to get feedback, it's not. It puts a lot of limitations on you, because people, will then be worried about functionality versus, okay, it's teaching the right things. This is what I wanted to teach. And they might give you some feedback and say, well, I don't like this 4-tab click to reveal that you have here, or whatnot, but they're at least more focused on the whatever text or content is on screen and reviewing that versus whatever is developed. And that, like traditionally in like a UX review process, and we can adapt this to e-learning too, they'll traditionally start with even just a paper prototype of an application. That's basically just sticky notes and a piece of, maybe even like cardstock or something that has an image and ask users to say, okay, go touch here, find where this is located. Can you locate all these different things just on this paper prototype without any fidelity? And they'll increase the fidelity of their prototypes as they go along to, a gray box like we're showing there with the wireframes, or a mock-up, or then to a final application when they're closer to release. To continue to get feedback, but then they're looking for feedback on different things, right? They're looking for, the first time they're looking at feedback on, can people understand what they're doing, which in our case, that is, do they understand what content we're trying to present? And then they increase the complexity. And that's what we can do as well, is say, okay, we want people to focus on just the content. So, okay, I'm not going to send them anything that has color in it. I'm just going to have them focus on what we have here. They're going to be able to understand conceptually what these activities do, but they're not going to be able to say, okay, functionally, I don't like how this works. That comes later, because those things become distracting if you're looking at those right off, because that's the cool and fun stuff. And initially, you don't want people really worried about the cool and fun stuff. You want them worried about what content they're looking at. So yeah, so my suggestion is just strip out as much fidelity as you can out of that, making it just as simple as you can to communicate that.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more question, and then we have a couple more things to chat about before we close out. First of all, this is it's kind of here's a slightly in-depth question. Okay. We currently use a design document that outlines the content and the how, when it should be taught. How can I integrate the storyboard into this process? Do you only storyboard the visual self-paced learning, or would you storyboard the entire course?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I think hopefully this person can give us maybe more clarity here, but so you're looking at different learning activities that you're doing, not just the self-paced e-learning is what I'm understanding from this, and would you storyboard out those other activities? Right. You can. I mean, and it's probably a good idea to say, okay, I want this, and you do this more in what I would call like a process flow, where you would say, okay, person does activity A, well then step B is this, you kind of show that in kind of a flow chart more than a storyboard. I would think, at least that's my theory. So this is all just me shooting from the hip here. This is not necessarily anything I thought about too in depth, but so you could create different elements to communicate visually what you're trying to have the learner do. And so like you could do that through a storyboard. You could do that through some sort of a flow chart. Would be what I'm kind of seeing there. But yeah, and it's kind of just dependent on the activity, how you would want to show that visually to get sign off or create that understanding.
Fantastic. Like I said, that's the last question that we'll take for now. Please don't hesitate to continue to send your questions, and we can reach out to you offline if you really need something, or you can always email us at info@elearningbrothers.com. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have that way. Another place to put questions that you may run into, or ideas or brainstorming, is in our community. So if you have not heard of it or used it before, you can go to rockstars.elearningbrothers.com. That's our community. We've got Storyline users there, Captivate users, PowerPoint, Lectora desktop and online. We've got Scenario VR in there, LMS users, all kinds of conversations happening in there at rockstars.elearningbrothers.com, and we will include that in the chat window. You can just click on that if you'd like to peruse it before you decide to join. That's a great one, and I think you've got one more slide for me as well, Josh.
Slide.
If you would like to try ReviewLink, we talked about ReviewLink a lot. That's something else that's included here, what you see on the screen. It's part of Lectora. So Lectora, Asset Library, and Scenario VR, these are all awesome tools that we're constantly developing. We're making improvements to them all the time. So you can try those for free for 30 days. Just visit elearningbrothers.com and click on Authoring Suites, and you can try those out for free, like I said. And there's always, like, another thing I love is that these are growing. These are always changing. We've got new stuff coming in Lectora, new stuff coming in Scenario VR. In fact, I think we're going to be launching something new in Scenario VR in the next week or so, and it's going to be really, really cool virtual reality stuff. If you came to our ELBX Online event a few months ago, the expo hall, our virtual expo hall, was all in Scenario VR. Very, 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 very cool software. I also want to let you guys know that we announced this morning, so it's been quiet, that we're going to be having a big launch event. Something big is coming, and that is launching on February 2nd. You can register for that launch event at the link that's in the chat here. The big launch is what we're calling it, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So please do register for that. It's going to be a ton of fun, and it'll be exciting. I see some comments. What about those of us who are using Storyline? You can buy the asset library on its own if you just want templates and assets, and that's great for Storyline users. So
we're adding more to Storyline templates. We didn't release as much last year for Storyline, but we are changing that this year, and we're going to be putting out some pretty cool stuff. We have some good ideas for what we're going to do with Storyline templates in the coming year.
And you can see in our community also that there's a couple articles about using Scenario VR with Storyline. So if you want to add that virtual reality element to your courses, but you're committed to Storyline, you can still make those work together. It's very, very cool. There's some more questions. Tell us more about Scenario VR. Scenario VR is just a super awesome tool. Just go to eLearningBrothers.com. There's a Scenario VR tab. Click on that, and you can learn all about it. It's a great way to take that first step into virtual reality. And I would argue your last step into virtual reality. There's no other tool that you need after you go to Scenario VR, but I'm on the market.
We could include since people are curious about that, we could include the link to the expo in an email or something to them, because that's a really good example to see what's possible there with Scenario VR.
Very, very, very cool. All right, so because of that, we are definitely out of time. Thank you, Josh. This has been very, very useful. Yeah. People are loving it. Please go and make great storyboards so that you can become an e-learning rock star and just make rockin' e-learning all the time. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Josh, and we'll talk to you guys all later.